Okay, before we get going with today's video, I just want to start off by thanking you all. Just recently, we have just hit 300 subscribers, and all I can just say is that I'm absolutely grateful for you guys' support for the channel. It has been a ridiculous summer, and just speaking from the heart, this is one of the best things that has ever happened to my channel. So once again, just a massive shout out to all you guys, and I will make sure that I'll keep pumping out the content that you want for as long as I can. And because I'm slowly building up a little group for this channel, I should mention that I now have different platforms for you guys to have a look at if you're interested. I have a second channel called Chef Roly. I'm going to try and use this as my main Let's Play channel going forward because I am planning on slowly using this current channel that I have as where I'll upload my main content. Plus, I plan on using that second channel as a place where I just upload whatever I want. And if you can believe, I have a Twitter. Now, I don't really use my Twitters much, but with this influx of new subscribers, I shall try and use that account more, just to bring up some updates and announcements for what video or projects I'm planning up next. This is mainly because my channel doesn't have the community tab yet, so I gotta use another method to give you guys updates on what I do. Now, with all that out of the way, let us return to today's main topic. Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak is obviously going to be the last installment to the 5th generation of the franchise. Sooner rather than later, Monster Hunter 6 will be just around the corner and the journey to Generation 5 will eventually come to a close. So to celebrate the era that has the most commercial success out of any past generations of Monster Hunter, and the era that completely changed the franchise from the ground up, I'd like to start off the festivities by ranking all 4 of the flagship monsters that represented each of the 4 games in the 5th generation. In this video, we will have a look at which of the 4 flagships has represented the generation the best, and do keep in mind that I'll be grading each monster by my personal preference towards their fight, the impact towards their respective games, and just my overall opinion on each monster in general. So let's have a look and see who is the best flagship in the 5th generation. I'm going to order this ranking from worst to best, and I have to reiterate that this is all from my own personal opinion, and to be fair, I do like all the 4 flagships of Generation 5. But by rankings alone, I'll have to set the record straight, so here we go. Starting off, on last in this ranking, unfortunately we have the Magnamalo. As I said earlier, I like all 4 of the flagships, but if I have to force my hand on which of the 4 is the weakest, then it'll have to be this steroid-inducing exploding tiger. Now please, by no means is Magnamalo the weakest here. This thing, lore-wise, can easily beat Elder Dragons with ease, and he is on par with the Zinogre as one of the most flashiest and visually imposing bosses in the entire franchise. But if I'm going to be honest, he just narrowly falls behind the rest of the flagships in terms of him not really having a memorable presence after Rise, especially in the endgame to that installment. The fight with the Magnamalo itself is one of the most tense in the game, especially if you fight him for the first time, and especially if you've experienced fighting him for the first time in Rise's last demo. But story-wise, you only encounter Magnamalo twice. One after your first rampage, and lastly his actual quest. And during the release of Rise, we all had to wait in the last title update of the game for Magnamalo to leave a more memorable impression in the storyline. What's more confusing is that during the lead up to the release of Monster Hunter Rise, we were all thought to believe that Magnamalo is one of the main sources for the rampage. I mean, personally, I was led to believe that somewhere down the line we might actually stumble upon Magnamalo in the middle of a rampage quest, akin to how we would encounter Tigrex for the first time in Freedom Unite when we were killing Popos. But no, we don't even encounter Magnamalo in a rampage until the first title update, and before Rise had the last storyline quest added, this poor thing didn't really feel special. Remember that point I made where Magnamalo can easily defeat Elder Dragons like Teostra or Kushala? We wouldn't know that, because that bit of lore was introduced in the first title update. But after Rise has finally been updated to its full version, we now can appreciate this monster as one of the most memorable fights in Rise. It's just a shame that Magnamalo didn't really have the best first impressions upon the release of that game. Now, coming in third in the list is the Velkhana, the frosted mascot to Iceborne. From the fight alone to just her presence when you're up against her, she is surprisingly one of the most fun and challenging Elder Dragons you go up against. Now I say surprisingly because during the announcement and lead up to Iceborne, I really didn't care too much for her. Kushala Daora is already an ice-dwelling Elder Dragon, plus Velkhana uses the same model as the Kushala, and the ice armor gimmick has already been taken from the Zamtrios, which I like with his fight. So going in, Velkhana didn't feel unique or new about her, especially going in as a main storyline boss to Iceborne's campaign. And speaking of the storyline, I'll just have to say this here, but Shara Ishvalda, the stereotypical last boss fight for any Monster Hunter storyline, completely outshines Velkhana in terms of presence and spectacle. Don't get me confused though, Velkhana at the start was a very challenging fight for me, and her moveset really kept me on my toes during the whole encounter. But I gotta say, once beating her I really didn't have that lasting memory of her encounter. I just simply moved on to the next fight and that was pretty much it. And that got even worse when I finally made it to Shara Ishvalda, and my god, talk about being outshined and just completely blown off. Simply by the spectacle alone, that gave me more of a memorable experience and fun time in Iceborne than the supposed flagship of the DLC. Velkhana, simply put, is a solid monster, don't get me wrong. She did her job alright in having an important presence and role in the storyline to the DLC. She's all over the place in the storyline throughout your progression in Iceborne. Velkhana is never too far away, and yes, going back to her initial fight, she is very challenging and fun to go up against. But she just falls short on leaving that lasting feeling that leaves people talking about her for years to come. Coming in second place is the latest member to this group. Almost everything about the Malzeno is just absolutely perfect. From the theme song, the gear you can make out of him, and especially his fight. Just his appearance alone during the middle of Sunbreak's storyline pretty much tells you all you need to know on how much of a threat this guy is. Purely magnificent in how he looks and how he fights, there really isn't anything I can say that praises this guy even more. A very memorable experience in going up against him just for how insane this guy is and how he behaves in his fight, but unfortunately I don't really think that the Malzeno is the best flagship for this generation, due to a couple of reasons. Firstly, he suffers the same fate as the Magnamalo, due to the fact that he doesn't really appear as much during the storyline. Like Magnamalo, the Malzeno only has a couple of cutscenes during the storyline, then after beating the Elder Dragon, you're pretty much ready to face the final boss monster, which is pretty underwhelming because I do feel as though they could have done more with the Malzeno. This guy could have been more of a menace for the kingdom story-wise, and a decent build-up to his introduction could have added more to making Malzeno even more dangerous. And the last reason is the fact that his Blood Blight is fairly underwhelming when it comes to being a real threat to a fight. For the majority of my time playing Sunbreak, I really didn't feel the effects of Blood Blight as much as I thought I would. I don't know whether it's just my playstyle, or the fact that I always come into a quest with recovery up always gemmed in. For me at least, this factor does kind of bring down the level of the danger that the Malzeno could bring whenever I fight him. He may not be the best flagship for the generation in my opinion, but at the end of the day, second place isn't that bad, and the Malzeno is definitely one of the most memorable debutants of this generation by far. Now, in what is my opinion as the best flagship monster for the 5th generation, the first place on this ranking definitely belongs to the first flagship monster of this generation. The absolute best in terms of how well this guy has been presented throughout Monster Hunter World, the fact that fighting him for the first time feels completely brutal and intense through every minute, and just his presence and appearance alone being the most that just stands out from the rest of the roster due to how terrifying and crazy he is. The Nergigante absolutely has to be the perfect mascot to representing the 5th generation hands down. His armor set, his weapons, his theme, the design to this thing, I could go on. His arc-tempered version was almost impossible and completely ridiculous, and his variant in Iceborne felt okay but not too memorable, but Nergigante in his based version is completely well-rounded in terms of difficulty and design. His lore really does fit with his appearance as a force of nature that eats other elder dragons, and unlike the Magnamalo, we can actually witness this lore with the turf wars that the Nergigante has with other elder dragons. This guy is such a beast that he doesn't even settle down with his own spotlight in his respective game. Nergigante in his variant form completely steals the scene during your final scene with the Shara Ishvalda in Iceborne, and unlike the Malzeno, you can actually see Nergigante throughout all of your time playing in World. Quite honestly, the build-up and anticipation in fighting this thing is actually the best out of every flagships throughout the entire franchise. From the clues around the world with his fawns, to him coming out of nowhere when you find the Zora Magnaros, to finally his actual quest, this dude is surprisingly well set out. Yes, I know that it is very predictable that the first flagship for the generation ended up being the first in this ranking video, but actually it does make a lot of sense when you think of how well Nergigante is handled in World. For me, Monster Hunter World has put a lot of emphasis on being a more grounded entry to the franchise, and as such, Nergigante himself really fits this point fairly well. He's the only one among the 4 flagships that doesn't have a unique ailment or an element. He doesn't really feel flashy in a way that he fights, but going into the role of a hyper-aggressive beast that is at the top of the table in terms of just pure power, the Nergigante of course does that role well. And for that, it's something that genuinely adds to why this monster is the perfect mascot for this generation. Just simply terrifying. And that has been it for this video. Generally, I do like all of the 4 monsters mentioned. If this was a perfect world, I'd be more than happy to have all 4 of these guys return in the next game, but do let me know what you guys think. Please don't leave yourself out of this discussion. Leave your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you do enjoy this video, do leave a like at the end, and I shall see you in the next video.